it's plain as day that the San Francisco Giants need to upgrade their roster, right? After losing, I don't even know, they were below 500 in 2023. They were a 500 team in 2022. And so you know it, I know it, the front office knows it, ownership knows it. They need to improve. But what positions do they need to improve? We're going to do a position by position breakdown of where the Giants stand next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on this show we provide daily episodes Monday through Friday, talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, and I'm a lifelong fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube, so check us out there if you have not already. And please hit that subscribe button wherever it is that you're following the show. And coming up on today's show, I just wanted to take a look at, we've received some mailbag questions, and this kind of is just like an extended long answer to a mailbag question about like which positions do the Giants need to improve. And I say positions plural because obviously, like I said, you know it, I know it, your dog knows it, your cat knows it, your iguana knows it, everybody knows it. Everybody here in Zihuatanejo knows it. The Giants need to get better. So, where I'm going to turn to is actually the Fangraphs depth charts, which they look at not just like who's your primary player at each position, but who is going to be, what is the group of players going to be. It's an estimate, of course, that's going to make up that's going to take at-bats out of that spot in the order, and we're going to look at pitching as well in 2024. And the first position that we start at, naturally, is the catcher position. We could start with pitchers, but we're gonna do pitchers last. The catcher position, this is one that's changed pretty dramatically for the Giants from last year to this year, given the emergence of Patrick Bailey. So the Giants right now come in at number 13 out of 30 teams with their projection for their catchers, with a total of 3.2 projected wins above replacement. And I believe this is steamer projections, not counting Zip's projections, which will later get kind of folded in, I believe. But for now, it's the steamer projections for 2024. Steamer's just the name of a projection system. Anyway, this projection system has Patrick Bailey worth a pretty robust and healthy 2.7 Fangraphs wins above replacement. I should say like steamer wins above replacement in only 384 plate appearances. And Joey Bart at 0.2 in 147 plate appearances, and Blake Sabol at 0.3 in 109 plate appearances. So Sabol producing a little bit better than Bart in about 40 fewer plate appearances. But significantly, we're looking at Patrick Bailey, nearly a 3-win player in very limited playing time. So I think that I would take the over for sure on only 384 plate appearances for Patrick Bailey. I want to say he probably had that many-ish this season, so I will look. He had 353, and the projection being just 384, I don't know why that would be so low. And so if you bump that up to 450, 475, then you're looking even better there. So the Giants, for the first time since Buster Posey retired, looking pretty set at the catcher position, whereas I was always pessimistic. Yes, I was pessimistic about Joey Bart having success, and so far that has been the case. He has not found success, and he is out of options next year, and so something's going to have to give. But anyway, the Giants are in solid shape at the catcher position. And of course, these are just projections. Of course, Patrick Bailey could do better. This projection system has him kind of putting up those good numbers pretty much solely on defense alone and not much with the bat, which is what it ended up kind of being. He was about 22% below average offensively when all was said and done. After a hot start, he really did cool off at the plate. So moving on, we've got to move on and look at first base, where the Giants come in probably higher than you would think, given that they don't have, like, you think of first base historically, especially if you've been a fan for a long time, you think of like these big boppers, right? And you look at the top teams, and that's, well, just the top two even. And that's what you've got. You've got Matt Olson of the Braves. You've got Freddie Freeman, Vladimir Guerrero Jr., Bryce Harper is going to be exclusively first base, Pete Alonso, Paul Goldschmidt. You think of these kinds of players. But the Giants still come in the top half. Not that that's anything to get too excited about, to be roughly in the middle. That's kind of been their problem the last couple of years. It's not like they've been dreadful. They've been more just mediocre, and that's not good enough. So, however, like, they come in at number 14 with this projection, with Lamont Wade Jr. projected to get the Lions' share of the playing time there. And I think that, like, as currently constructed, that is what makes sense. They just did tender him a contract, which was a no-brainer decision. The projection for Wade is just a really healthy 350 on base percentage with a kind of modest 420 slugging. It's not low, but it's kind of an average slugging. With Wilmer Flores getting some playing time there as well, I would probably take the over on Flores getting 154 plate appearances at first base as currently constructed, because you start to look at the DH position, which we'll get to. That's where I'm like kind of putting some guys that are currently in the outfield. I'm kind of putting them at DH so you can make an upgrade, because that's the whole point of doing this exercise, is to like take inventory, but then discuss, okay, so where can you make your upgrades? So the Giants are fine at first base with this combination of Wade and Flores and mixing in some JD Davis potentially. And this is where if they make an actual upgrade at third base, then JD Davis gets more playing time. And then what do you do with Wilmer Flores? So you start to create a potential surplus of players at a certain spot, and then that's where trades become more and more likely. So moving on, we've got a position where the Giants are really stable, and yet I definitely take the over on this, with the Giants at number 20 out of 30 teams at second base, with Thairo Estrada being getting 560 plate appearances in the projection, and the next closest player being Brett Wisely. So I guess some of this is, the not very strong projections, even though it's very limited playing time for Wisely or Casey Schmidt, which is basically what we saw this year. But for Estrada, it's a projection of 2.0 WAR over 560 plate appearances. This season, he put up 3.9 in 530 plate appearances. The year before that, 2.8 in 541 plate appearances. And so I don't buy like a big drop-off coming for Thairo Estrada. So, yeah, this is one where I'm taking the over, and the Giants it's not a position where they need to upgrade. Thairo Estrada is kind of locked in. Farhan Zaidi even said as much about certain spots on the diamond, referring to Patrick Bailey, Thairo Estrada, and that may have been all he mentioned. Maybe he also said like Yastrzemski and Slater kind of platooning, occupying one spot. But otherwise, there's going to be some room for improvement as we move to the left side of the infield coming up momentarily. So before we get into that left side of the infield, which is less stable now than it's been in a long time due to Brandon Crawford's free agency, before we get into it, I want to discuss or tell you about our good friends over at FanDuel, which is America's #1 sportsbook, and for a good reason. And you can score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Like I said, right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. And honestly, a little secret between you and me, it doesn't even have to be your team. You could take the team that's most heavily favored, place a $5 money line bet, and if that team wins, be it your team or another team or whatever, then you get $150 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use, and there's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. All right, as promised, we are going to continue moving around the diamond, and it gets... So far, like, I haven't come across a position where it's like, yes, they must upgrade here. The closest would be first base, but you've got Wade, you've got Flores, you've got JD Davis, and so you could afford to upgrade there, but it's not the most obvious spot. But there are obvious spots coming up. So thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top stories in sports of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. And so, as we continue our move around the diamond, the next spot, technically, if we're like going based on scoring positions, would be third base. But I'm just going in the order it's listed here on the website, Fangraphs, and we're going to look at shortstop, where, you know, it's not like the projections going into last year for Brandon Crawford were very good, but suddenly Brandon Crawford is not projected to be on the Giants for the first time since, 2011. I don't know if he was projected to be on the Giants in 2011, but he ended up on them, and then he became who he became, which was a franchise legend. But suddenly, you're looking at unproven players. And when you're looking at unproven players, unless they're like truly the elite of the elite in terms of prospects, it takes a very special prospect to have like really, really strong projections. And right now, that's not what you're seeing from Steamer, at least, out of Marco Luciano. And so at shortstop, the Giants rank in terms of the Steamer projection here at the shortstop position, number 26 out of 30 teams. And so that's where we get our first, when we've heard, it's logical. We've heard Farhan Zaidi talk about the need or desire, but basically it's a need, in my opinion, to have an insurance plan. And the insurance plan can't be Casey Schmidt either, because in the same way, he's also unproven. And so they are going to need, I don't know exactly what the answer is, but, I discussed Tommy Edman a lot at the trade deadline, leading up to the trade deadline in 2023. And I still think that he could make a lot of sense, especially for a Giants team that may end up with a surplus of pitching and young pitching. Perhaps like Tommy Edman, what's great about him is versatility. And so let's say Luciano does well, then Edman can play pretty much any other position, including the outfield, including center field. And if Luciano struggles, then you've got a shortstop in Tommy Edman who can play well defensively anywhere. And so, ideally, I think you come across a player like that. But it's hard to find. This is a weak free agent class in terms of position players. And you look at shortstops, Tim Anderson is like an intriguing name, but coming off a horrible season. But would he really want to go somewhere where there's a chance? Like, the Giants just aren't going to give up on Marco Luciano without ever giving him a shot. I think that there's not a shortstop good enough to warrant signing them and then making Marco Luciano expendable in a trade. There really isn't. And so anyway, this is just a position where they will need to get some insurance in case Luciano struggles. So yes, definitely, for sure. Moving on, third base. This is another position where the Giants are kind of in the middle, with J.D. Davis projected to get most of the playing time, unsurprisingly. 448 plate appearances. By the way, these plate appearance figures are just like guessed by Fangraphs staff. It's not like a computer is guessing them. These are actual people just kind of guessing how many. Like the total number is 700 plate appearances for the whole position, and they just split it up. And for third base, they've got Davis, Schmidt, Flores, Tyler Fitzgerald, and David Villar collectively coming in at number 17 out of 30 teams. And so this is a position where you could afford to upgrade, given that it's like I said, it's a weak free agent class for position players, but one of the players who's out there is a potential fit, one of the position players, and that's Matt Chapman. And so there are pros and cons to Matt Chapman, as I say every time that I've talked about him. But, what he is just a really kind of steady, really good defensive, powerful, established major league third baseman. But J.D. Davis, he's coming off a pretty strong year. But what's concerning is how he faded big time down the stretch. And so if you were to sign a Matt Chapman, this is a position where, say you just go out and sign Matt Chapman. What happens with J.D. Davis? You could say, oh, well, he platoons at first base with Lamont Wade Jr. That makes a lot of sense. But then what happens with Wilmer Flores? And then you say, oh, well, he should just be the primary DH. And that makes a lot of sense. But then I would say, how do you upgrade in the outfield? So that's kind of where I'm going to turn to now, because the outfield is crowded if the players that are projected out there don't move to the DH spot, where Jock Peterson, by the way, is a free agent. So looking at left field, the Giants come in the bottom half of the league. Where are they? Number 19. And it's Michael Conforto with projected 364 plate appearances out there. And so it looks like they are probably projecting it, because 364 is a low number. Looks like they're assuming significant DH responsibilities. Probably also right field. What am I thinking? I think we'll see where they put him. But Conforto, 364 plate appearances there. Haniger, 154. Slater 70, Sable 42, and then Elliot Ramos, Luis Matos, Wade Meckler. But a total of just 1.5 WAR, which is below average, hence 19th out of 30 teams. So certainly outfield is a position, just generally in the outfield, the Giants could afford to improve. And so I don't know, I think that as we go through the other outfield spots, it may become clearer exactly. They've talked about the need or want or desire to upgrade in center field. And so let's just say you get Conforto and Haniger. If you platoon them, they're not really paid like platoon players, but they played like platoon player. Platoon? Did I just say platoon? Platoon players. And so I don't think you're just going to hand Haniger and Conforto everyday starts initially. Haniger does not, he's not a guy who has historically needed to be platooned at all. Conforto more so is really good against right-handed pitching, not so good against left-handed pitching. And so you could form a platoon there. You could form a platoon where at DH with Flores and Conforto, and Haniger, the year he had was so atypical for him. And that's kind of what's not just frustrating, but perplexing, and also makes it difficult. It's confounding. He was so kind of consistent. Injuries certainly were a part of his past, and injuries were a part of his present in 2023. But Blake Sable was the opening day starter, so it looks like probably once again we're gonna have a new opening day left fielder, and I don't know who it's gonna be. I'd probably guess Mitch Haniger, to be honest, but we shall see. So moving on to center field, we have the Giants coming in again. Like, this is reminding me of what I saw last year. They're again kind of middle of the pack. And interestingly, they're projecting Luis Matos to have the most plate appearances at that position right now, and put up solid numbers, actually. A 266 average, 325 on base, 407 slugging. To hold his own like he did at age 21 as a major league rookie was impressive and bodes pretty well for his future, although he wasn't very good defensively, especially in center. And then Mike Yastrzemski and Slater projected to get playing time here as well, including Wade Meckler, a significant chunk of playing time, and overall coming in about mediocre at that position. But again, Zaidi has talked about the desire to improve in center, and so then I was kind of forgetting about Matos. That's what I was saying. And so suddenly you're looking at, you've got Yastrzemski and Slater. They already agreed to terms with them on a 2024 contract. And then you have Luis Matos as a interesting young player with a lot of potential. You have Conforto. You have Haniger. This is where suddenly you're looking at potentially a surplus, even if you move some guys to DH. And if you sign like a Matt Chapman, as I said, and then JD Davis is platooning at first and then Flores is taking up DH spots, suddenly you're just kind of overloaded. And so it's maybe third base. I think you may have to trade some guys here. And I don't know, pair them with a pitcher and get a better, pair a position player and a pitcher and get a better position player in return is maybe something that I'm seeing. So coming up in just a minute, we'll finalize this. We'll look at right field. We'll kind of take a glance at the pitching situation and how it all is going to have to do with pitching, because that is the strength of this free agent market. So we will get into that aspect of it in just a minute. And before we do, all right, as promised, more about the Giants' right field situation and their pitching situation according to the Steamer projection system. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top stories in sports of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. So continuing on through our, around the diamond, we find ourselves in right field, where once again the Giants are kind of in the middle. It's not the worst thing to be like in the middle everywhere, because this is what I've said. It's what I said yesterday when I was describing why it was a no-brainer to, not only tender contracts, but to agree to salaries with Yastrzemski and Slater, is because you don't want to be like towards the bottom in several categories and then suddenly think, okay, let's just add a star player and then we're good. It doesn't really work that way. You need solid players and then add a star or two or three, and then suddenly that's how I think that is the formula for being good. And so it could be worse. It could be better. It could be worse. And that's why you're seeing roughly 500 records the last couple of years. So in right field, Giants come in at number 16, right around the middle, with Mike Yastrzemski getting the most of the projection here for playing time, followed by Conforto and Slater and Haniger, Elliot Ramos, Luis Matos, and coming in right in the middle of the pack. So let's just look at DH, because I'm curious who they're projecting to play DH the most for the Giants. And it's Wilmer Flores at 336 plate appearances, Mitch Haniger next at 175, and Conforto with 84, and then just a hodgepodge kind of mix of some other guys randomly getting some DH playing time. But the Giants, again, coming in right around the middle at number 17. And so these are the spots, like pretty much any of these spots where you're in the middle are spots where you could afford to upgrade. And then, like I said, with shortstop and Luciano, you need insurance. Luciano obviously could be much better than where he's projected there. That's just the thing about unproven players, is it's not going to say that they're great until it kind of has more confidence in that. And so that's when we turn our attention to starting pitching. And this is where I think everything changes, because the Giants come in, even in their current situation where, like, who do they have? They have Logan Webb, and then who, right? It's like Alex Cobb is going to miss a month at least with the 6-month recovery time hip surgery. You've got Ross Stripling coming back, Anthony DeSclafani, and then just a bunch of young guys like Kyle Harrison, Keaton Winn, Tristan Beck, Mason Black, Kaiwei Tang, Sean Jelly. Those are the guys projected to pitch for the Giants as starters in 2024. And guess what? That group comes in already at number 11. So I think that's the highest of any position we've looked at, is starting pitcher. And that is before you see a significant addition. And they've just pretty clearly projected their intent to add a significant kind of frontline starter, or at least they've projected that it is something they will definitely be looking into, which, you know, I understand if you're skeptical that they actually do it, but it's the strength of this of this free agent class for sure, is starting pitching. And there's Yoshinobu Yamamoto out of Japan, who was just posted and can, you know, there's a 45-day window in which he must sign, or else he can't sign with any team during this offseason. And that window started today. There's Blake Snell, who just won the National League Cy Young Award. And there's Sonny Gray, who has Bay Area ties and was a AL Cy Young finalist. There's Jordan Montgomery, who had a couple really good years back-to-back. There's Eduardo Rodriguez, who just had a really good season. There's a lot. It does go fast, but it's definitely the strength of this class. And so, in conclusion, if the Giants, I mean, these are, again, just projections. They've got Logan Webb, by the way, coming in. A big part of this is with a 204 inning projection and a 3.54 ERA and over 4 wins above replacement by himself. And some of the bottom teams are around that number in total. And that's just Logan Webb. And so if you add another guy who's around that total, say you add like a 4-win player, like maybe, what's his name? Yamamoto perhaps would come in with something like that as his projection. You would vault right now to the number 1 projected rotation in the game with Yamamoto and Webb, and then, you know, Cobb, and some of the young guys like have solid projections. And so this is where I think you create potentially a surplus, and how you add position player talent outside of a couple of guys. I mean, a few guys maybe. Matt Chapman, Cody Bellinger, and Jung-Hoo Lee out of Korea. There just really isn't that many guys that I'm interested in on the position player side in free agency. And so again, when Farhan Zaidi says something, it's like we should listen. And he's talked about how, adding athleticism and defense on the position player side, this is like a separate point, that it's, in general, in free agency, guys are older, and so it's tougher to kind of add youth and athleticism through free agency. Part of the reason why Jung-Hoo Lee and Yoshinobu Yamamoto are so attractive is actually because they're 25 each, 25 years old. But if you don't come away with Jung-Hoo Lee and you want to add a young athletic center fielder or something, or I don't want to say shortstop, I don't know, center fielder makes a lot of sense, I suppose, then perhaps, like I said, you could sign some starters. Say you sign, Yamamoto and Gray or something, or even just Eduardo Rodriguez and Sonny Gray or something. And then all of a sudden you've got a surplus and Tristan Beck, Keaton Winn, Mason Black, guys like this, Hayden Birdsong. Like, you could package some guys and get position player talent of equal value in return. And so that's kind of where I see things now as we are getting closer to the winter meetings, which are less than 2 weeks away from starting. And that's when stuff starts to happen. That's where Aaron Judge signed Carlos Correa. That initial agreement was just like a week after the winter meetings or less. So stuff's going to start happening soon, and I can't wait. So anyway, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Everydayers, look out on Twitter or X for a mailbag prompt. I'd like to get some of your questions as we get closer and closer to things actually happening in baseball, because it does always start slow, but we're getting, I think, the ball rolling here with some signings starting to trickle in. So look out on Twitter for the prompt. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter or X at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, please consider rating it or leaving a review. It helps me out a lot, so thanks in advance. And thank you to everyone who's done so already. Can't wait to be with you again tomorrow. Thanks again for listening. Today, you are now Locked On Giants.